A lion begged a ranger for help. His mate's condition was beyond terrifying. It happened in a way no one could have predicted in the wild heart of Tsavo National Park. A senior ranger named Daniel Karuki found himself staring at something that made his pulse thunder in his ears. Just 15 feet away, a massive male lion rose onto its hind legs. Its golden mane shook in the late evening wind, and its amber eyes burned with something that wasn't aggression. The animal's front paws were pressed together, like a plea. For 12 years, Daniel had walked this land, patrolling its boundaries, protecting its animals from poachers, and guiding lost tourists to safety. He had seen lions charge, roar, fight, and kill. But he had never seen one stand like a man, almost as if it was trying to speak. This moment defied everything he thought he knew about predators. The lion's name was Niati. Rangers had tracked him since he was a cub, and he had grown into one of the park's most dominant males, broad-shouldered. Scarred from battles, proud and powerful, Niati ruled a vast territory, feared by rivals, respected by his pride. But that night, Daniel saw no kingly pride in him. He saw desperation that had started half an hour earlier. Daniel was patrolling a remote northern stretch of the park where poachers often laid their traps. The sun was low, painting the savanna in long shadows. Then he heard it, a lion's call. But it wasn't the familiar thunder of a territorial roar. It wasn't the deep rumble of a hunter signaling his pride. This sound was urgent, broken, repeating like a message trying to cut through the air. Daniel's training told him to retreat immediately, get back to his Land Rover, and call for backup. But his instincts, sharpened from years in the bush, told him this was something different. Against protocol, he moved toward the sound, radio in hand, nerves stretched tight. That's when Niati appeared. He blocked Daniel's path, circling as if to keep him from leaving. His massive body loomed over the grass, his eyes locked with Daniel's. And then he did the unthinkable. He stood up, paws lifted, like a desperate man begging for help. Daniel's throat went dry. Every survival instinct screamed at him to back away. Yet the lion didn't lunge. He didn't roar. Instead, after a moment, Niati dropped back to all fours, turned, and walked a few paces toward a dense thicket of acacia trees. Then he looked back. The message was as clear as it was impossible. He wanted Daniel to follow. The ranger froze. His mind rebelled against it. A lion leading a man? That was something out of children's tales, not the reality of Africa's wilderness. Still, the feeling in his chest, the unshakable certainty, was undeniable. Niati wasn't threatening him. He was pleading. When Daniel hesitated, the lion returned, rose slightly again, and made a low, mournful sound that chilled the ranger to the bone. It wasn't just a noise. It carried a weight, a sorrow, almost like grief. Daniel's hand gripped his tranquilizer gun, but he didn't raise it. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "Easy, old boy. What's got you so worked up?" Niati turned again, moving back toward the thicket. Then he stopped, staring back with those burning eyes. And against every rule he had sworn to uphold, Daniel stepped forward. What he would find inside those trees would shake him to his core and reveal a sight so cruel, so terrifying, that even a hardened ranger like him struggled to breathe. The air inside the thicket was heavy and still, a pocket of silence broken only by the scrape of Daniel's boots against the dry earth. The thorny branches reached out to snag his uniform, tearing small threads from the fabric as if trying to hold him back. Every few steps, he caught the faint flick of a tail ahead, the golden shimmer of Niati's coat weaving steadily between the trees. The lion was careful, pausing often, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the ranger was still behind him. Daniel's heart thumped so loudly he was certain the animal could hear it. He had spent his life teaching younger rangers never to trust a predator's calm. A lion was still a lion, no matter how strangely it behaved. And yet, as minutes stretched on, he began to feel something different. This wasn't a trap. This was direction. Niati knew exactly where he was leading him. The deeper they went, the dimmer the light became. Shadows thickened, the warm glow of sunset struggling to cut through the tangled canopy of thorns. Then, in a small clearing, Daniel saw her. The sight rooted him to the ground. That a lioness lay collapsed in the dust, her tawny flank rising and falling with shallow, labored breaths. Her left hind leg was twisted unnaturally, blood soaking the fur around a cruel steel snare that bit deep into the flesh. The chain, anchored to the base of a sturdy acacia, pulled her limb taut. The smell hit Daniel next, the sour, infected stench of old blood and rotting tissue that he recognized her instantly. Jerry, Niati's mate. For 2 years, rangers had watched the pair hunt, raise cubs, and defend their territory with ferocious unity. Now, the proud lioness looked broken, her once bright eyes dulled with exhaustion, her strength all but drained. Niati padded forward and lowered his massive head beside hers, giving a soft nuzzle to her cheek. She flickered her ears weakly at the touch, but did not move. Then the male lifted his gaze to Daniel. In those amber eyes was something no textbook could explain, an appeal, raw and unmistakable. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry as the dust beneath his boots. His training screamed at him to stay back. Injured lions were the most dangerous of all, and a male protecting his mate was a recipe for disaster. Protocol dictated distance, observation, and waiting for the veterinary team. But his instincts, the same instincts that had carried him safely through years in the bush, told him the truth. Jerry didn't have that long that he raised his radio with a trembling hand. Base, this is Karuki. Severe code P at Sector 7. Adult lioness in a poacher's snare. Immediate veterinary response required. His voice cracked despite his effort to keep steady. She's conscious. Weak. Significant blood loss. Infection likely advanced. The reply came swift, calm, and professional. Copy that. Veterinary team mobilizing. ETA 45 minutes. Can you maintain safe distance until arrival? Daniel's eyes flicked to Jerry's leg. The snare had been there for days, he was sure of it. Every breath she took seemed weaker than the last. He looked back at Niati, who had settled beside her, his great body curved protectively around her failing frame. Not a snarl, not a roar, not a hint of the violence Daniel expected. Only patience. Only a silent, desperate waiting. 45 minutes. Too long. Daniel's hand brushed against the wire cutters clipped to his belt. Standard issue for patrols, tools meant for empty traps, not ones with dying lions still caught inside. His other hand hovered over the medical kit strapped to his pack. Antiseptic, antibiotics, bandages, enough to keep a wounded human alive in the bush. Could they do the same for her? He exhaled slowly, his breath shaking. You don't have time, girl, he whispered, almost to himself. His eyes rose once more to Niati. The great lion met his gaze, and for one impossible moment, it felt like understanding passed between them. Daniel knew what this meant. He would have to make a choice that could cost him his career or his life. That he stepped forward toward the dying lioness. Daniel's boots sank into the clearing's dust as he edged closer, every nerve in his body thrumming with the weight of the decision he had just made. The radio's echo still rang in his ears, the director's order to hold position until the veterinary team arrived. But he had switched it off. The silence now was absolute, broken only by the faint rasp of Jerry's labored breathing and the low chuffing sounds Niati made at her side. The lioness twitched as Daniel approached. A feeble attempt at resistance, but her strength was nearly gone. Her flank trembled, her claws flexed weakly in the soil, and then she stilled again. The infection had robbed her of the fight that defined her species. One glance at the snare was enough to confirm Daniel's dread. The steel had cut deep into muscle, the flesh swollen and discolored, the stench unmistakable. Every second counted. He dropped to one knee, laying out the supplies with careful movements. Wire cutters, antiseptic solution, bandages, and a vial of antibiotics meant for humans, but better than nothing. His hands shook, not from inexperience. He had field-treated countless wounds in his years as a ranger, but from the knowledge of where he was kneeling. A living lioness, conscious and in pain, just feet away. And beside her, the most formidable male in Savo. Amber eyes never leaving him. Daniel's breath came shallow, his voice steady only because he forced it to be. Easy now, he murmured, not just to Jerry, but to Niati as well. I'm going to try. He leaned forward, bringing the cutters to the cruel wire that had held her captive for days. The lioness flinched, a guttural sound rumbling in her throat, but she didn't strike. Niati pressed closer to her head, lowering his massive mane beside her face, as if anchoring her. Daniel squeezed the cutters, the hardened steel resisting with stubborn strength. His muscles strained, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought the trap. The snare snapped with a sharp metallic crack. Jerry jolted, releasing a cry that tore through the clearing. Daniel froze, his heart leaping into his throat. Niati rose halfway, his enormous frame looming over the ranger, teeth flashing in the dim light. Daniel's fingers hovered near the tranquilizer at his belt, but he didn't reach for it. He simply stayed still, waiting. Then, in a movement that would replay in Daniel's memory for the rest of his life, Niati lowered himself again, curling protectively against Jerry. There was no charge, no fury, only a trembling sound deep in his chest, soft, almost like reassurance. The worst was over. Or so Daniel prayed that he set to work with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound as best he could. The antiseptic burned, and Jerry moaned weakly, her muscles twitching under his touch. He spoke to her in low tones. Words meant more to steady himself than to calm the lioness. Each layer of gauze he pressed against the raw flesh felt hopelessly small compared to the injury, but he knew even this minimal care could buy precious minutes. Finally, he drew up the small syringe of antibiotics, his hands trembling as he found a spot in her uninjured leg. The injection slid in. Jerry shuddered once, then sagged, her body slackening into the dust. Daniel's stomach clenched. Had he pushed her too far? He held his breath, watching the slow rise and fall of her ribs. Relief washed over him when her breathing steadied, still shallow, but steady. Through it all, Niati remained where he was, his gaze locked on the ranger. And then it happened, something Daniel would never forget. The massive lion leaned forward and, for the briefest moment, pressed his forehead against Daniel's leg. A gesture so deliberate, so startlingly human in its meaning, that the ranger felt a shock run through his entire body. It was gratitude. Impossible, undeniable gratitude. At that exact moment, the faint rumble of engines reached the clearing. The veterinary team was near, but Daniel, still kneeling in the dust, knew the line had already been crossed. He had broken protocol. He had risked everything, and somehow, in the eyes of a lion, it had been the right choice. Headlights pierced the darkness as the first vehicle ground to a halt at the edge of the clearing. Dust swirled in the beams as doors opened and voices broke the silence. The veterinary team, led by Dr. Jessica Mutu, spilled out with crates of equipment, dart rifles, and the calm urgency of professionals who had seen too many victims of poachers' snares. Daniel rose slowly, stepping back to give them space, his knees stiff from crouching beside Jerry. His uniform was streaked with dust and blood, his hands raw from forcing the cutters through steel. He knew what was coming before Jessica even reached him. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed under her breath, her eyes darting toward Niati, who remained crouched protectively beside Jerry. "Treating a conscious lion without sedation? You could have been killed." Daniel swallowed hard, but his answer was steady. "She wouldn't have made it, Jess. Not another 45 minutes. He nodded toward Jerry's leg, the bandage already dark with fresh blood. "I had no choice." Before Jessica could reply, a second voice cut through, the deeper, sharper tone of Director Omandi. The park's director emerged from his vehicle, his face set in thunder. "Ranger Karuki," he barked, "you directly disobeyed a command. You endangered yourself, the animal, and this entire team. We'll deal with this after the operation." Daniel braced for the reprimand, but then Omandi's voice faltered. His eyes had fixed on the lions. Niati had not moved to drive the humans away. Instead, the male lion slowly rose to his full, towering height and stepped aside, giving the veterinary team a clear line to the injured lioness. It was not submission. It was permission. A hush fell over the clearing. Even the most skeptical rangers knew what they were seeing was not normal. Wild lions did not yield space to humans. They defended it with tooth and claw. But Niati stood just feet away, muscles tense, his gaze never wavering, as if willing the humans to do their work. Jessica was the first to recover. "Sedatives," she ordered briskly, gesturing to her team. A dart gun cracked softly, and within minutes Jerry's eyes glazed as the drugs took hold. Her breathing eased, her body slackened. The team swarmed forward, working quickly to assess the wound, disinfect it, and stabilize her for transport. Daniel hovered nearby, his chest tight with relief and fear. Through it all, Niati remained at her side. When one of the junior vets approached too abruptly, The lion rumbled a warning deep in his chest, a sound that froze the clearing. But he did not lunge. He merely shifted position, placing his great head near Jerry's, as though reminding everyone that her safety was his to guard. By the time the sedated lioness was lifted onto a stretcher and secured inside the transport vehicle, the night was thick with the sound of hyenas calling in the distance. Daniel expected Niadi's patience to shatter then, but what followed left even the director speechless. As the doors shut and the convoy began to roll forward, Niadi padded after them. Not charging, not threatening, just following. His amber eyes reflected the headlights as he paced beside the vehicle, step for step. He's escorting her, one of the younger rangers whispered in disbelief. No, Daniel said softly, watching the lion's steady stride. He's making sure we keep our promise. The convoy crept forward, the male lion shadowing them like a silent guardian. The humans inside spoke in hushed tones, hardly daring to breathe too loudly. Every one of them aware they were witnessing something beyond the boundaries of science or protocol. Hours later, when the gates of the wildlife medical facility loomed in the headlights, Niadi was still there. Dust clung to his mane, his paws raw from the long trek, but he did not falter. He stopped only when the gates closed behind the transport, sitting silently in the dawn's first light. His mate was inside. He would wait. No ranger, no director, no scientist present that night would ever forget the sight. A lion who refused to leave, as if guarding a hospital door. The gates of the facility had closed on Jerry, but Niadi never moved far from the perimeter. Through the long hours of surgery, as the medical team fought to clean away the infection and repair the damage to her leg, the great lion sat in the dust beyond the fence. He neither hunted nor rested properly, his amber eyes fixed on the compound. Rangers watched from the towers, some unnerved, others awed, as day gave way to night, and still he waited. It was a vigil that no one could explain and no one could ignore. Inside, Jerry clung to life. The infection had spread farther than first feared, requiring hours of painstaking work. Dr. Jessica and her team cut away necrotic tissue, flushed the wound, and stitched muscle with hands that never stopped moving. When at last she was wheeled into recovery, her survival was no longer a miracle in the making, but a fragile possibility. She had a chance, just enough of one dot when she stirred for the first time, lifting her head weakly against the bandages. Niadi seemed to know. From outside the barrier, he rose, pressed against the fence, and gave a low chuffing sound. It was answered faintly from within. The staff who witnessed it fell silent, struck by the clear recognition between them. Whatever separated human and animal understanding, in that moment felt impossibly small. Days turned into weeks. Jerry regained her strength, slow at first, then faster, each step steadier under the watchful eyes of her caregivers. Through it all, Niadi remained close, accepting food and water provided at the perimeter, but never straying far. His vigil became part of the daily rhythm of the facility, a reminder that the bond between the lions was not something that could be severed by walls or fear. The debate about what to do grew louder. Protocol dictated a clean separation, releases staged at different times. But Daniel, who had stood at Jerry's side in the clearing, argued that nothing about this case was normal. Niadi had sought help, had trusted humans with his mate, and had stood guard outside the gates for weeks. To break that bond now, he believed, would undo everything they had risked to preserve. Against precedent, the director agreed. A coordinated release would be attempted at dawn. 2 weeks later, the transports rolled out into the savannah. The air was cool, the sky painted with soft light, and a small team of rangers, Daniel among them, followed in silence. The vehicles halted at a clearing within Niadi's territory. First, Jerry's compartment opened. She stepped out unsteadily, her gait uneven but strong enough to carry her forward. She paused, scenting the air, her ears pricking at the sounds of home. Moments later, the second door opened. Niadi emerged with a steady stride, mane catching the morning light. He went directly to her, nuzzling her cheek, his body pressed close against hers. The humans who watched did not speak, afraid that even words might disturb the power of the scene before them. Together, the lions turned toward the open wilderness. Yet before leaving, Niadi lifted his head. His eyes found Daniel standing a short distance away. For a heartbeat that seemed to suspend time itself, The two held each other's gaze. Then Niati lowered his head, a slow, deliberate dip, before leading Jerry into the tall grass and the rising sun. The savannah swallowed them, but their story did not end there. Weeks later, reports came that Jerry had recovered fully, hunting once more beside her mate. Months later, cubs were seen tumbling at her side, living proof of survival and renewal. For Daniel, the memory of that night never faded. He had broken rules, risked his career, and trusted what logic said was impossible. In return, he had witnessed something that shifted the boundary between human and wild. A lion had asked for help, and in that plea, a truth had revealed itself, that the divide between species is not as wide as we once believed. The ranger would often say, when asked about the event, that the most terrifying part was not the danger, nor the defiance of protocol. It was the realization that the lions had been watching all along, understanding more than humans had ever imagined. And in a single act of trust, one desperate night in Savo, they had proved it.